Hey guys, so I guess today's story is kind of even more closer to a Let's Not Meet story, so technically it doesn't even really interrupt the rhythm of these kinds of videos. So a friend of mine recently got back from a 4-day running camp, and he had this kind of funny, a little bit scary story to tell about this one guy he met there. We'll just call him Alec. So Alec is he's got like short black hair, glasses, tan, he's kind of chunky, and during runs he was always behind everybody, but for whatever reason he had the most expensive running gear imaginable, like sweatbands, spandex, a really expensive running watch, and all the works. And so on the first day, he pulled his idea of a prank, I guess. He hauled some guy's mattress and other belongings into this random ass room, but the dumbass just left the key card to the room in the room, so they had to go to security and get the master key to get the guy's stuff back. And the entire time Alec is just losing it, and obviously pretty much nobody else found it even remotely funny. And just right off the bat, he continually asserted that his mom was a cop and that if anybody tried anything, he could get them all arrested. It was basically the "you can hit me, but my dad will sue" argument kind of thing. So one day, while everybody is just relaxing after a run, they're telling random stories about how people have almost hit them with a car while they're running and all that, mostly because they had almost just been hit themselves that day. So people tell some pretty funny but mild enough to be realistic stories. Like, for example, this dude was running with his school buddies and they almost get hit by this car. The car comes back around to cuss them out. So this guy in the car is just focused on flipping them off and like looking at them and cussing them out, and the guy ends up slamming into the car in front of him. The guy later tried to sue the school for it, but he obviously lost and accomplished nothing more than blowing a ton of money on legal fees, probably more than what the car was worth. Now, of course, Alec has a story to tell. So apparently he almost got hit by a car, right? Pretty basic runner story premise. But the guy apparently circled back around to cuss him out, too. And now this would make sense to do for a group of runners, but probably not worth it for just one guy. But, I mean, it's possible, right? But as if this wasn't far-fetched enough, Alec claims that after being cussed out, Alec pulled a switchblade on the guy. And apparently this guy threatened to call the cops on him, and Alec so bravely responded, "Ha! Good luck, my mom's a cop." So instead, the guy apparently pulls a gun on him. That's as far as Alec went, because when asked what happened next, he just said, "Oh, I can't remember." And the guys in the room just responded to his stories with things like, "Okay." Throughout the whole story, he was also stumbling and taking long pauses, like worse than I am when I'm trying to just come up with things on the fly while talking. So overall, it was pretty obvious he had made the whole thing up to be an absolute tool and to fit in and try and seem cool. And on the second day, he straight up ran down the hall and tackled this 6'3" guy out of nowhere with just no context or anything. So the next day, like, pretty much everybody is friends with each other in the camp, except for nobody really liked Alec after what he's been doing. So as revenge for the prank that he pulled earlier, the guys devise a plan. They decide they should do the exact same thing to him by taking out all of his stuff from his room, except not saying anything about it to him. There's a group of 3 6th graders in their own room, and they ask them if it's okay to hide Alec's stuff in there. Being 6th graders, they're just like, "Oh yeah," because they really want to be a part of some cool high school prank or whatever. A reason why they chose the 6th graders was because the 6th graders were always losing their key card, and thus they wouldn't be incriminated into this because they could make the excuse that somebody must have stole it and that they were locked out of the room the whole time. So the group all wants to go take showers, Alec included, and they go over there and they shove him to the back of the line. They know it's pretty mean of them to shove him to the back of the line, but the day before he cut the food line and the shower line, so they're just giving him what he deserves. They were also doing it to buy time for the prank. So after everyone takes their shower, it's just Alec and this guy named Tom. Tom is in on it, obviously, so while everyone else is busy hauling Alex's stuff to the 6th grade room, Tom is busy creating a distraction. He does it in quite possibly the dumbest and funniest way possible. To preface, half the showers have really cheap, easy to remove aluminum shower heads. And every so often, Tom would just hit out Alex's shower head down. And every so often, you would just hear from down the hall a clang, followed by Alex saying, "What the fuck, man?" And Tom occasionally responding, "Sorry, man, I can't help it." And when they were done, it was the funniest thing, seeing Alex's roommate's side of the room fully furnished, and then just the empty void on Alex's side with nothing but a bed frame, but only because they couldn't fit the bed frame through the door. So after this, they all decide to go take a run, with Alec presumably still in the shower. Now, what happens next is a bit of a third-hand account, as Tom told Taylor, Taylor being the friend of mine, who then told me. But anyways, Tom just decides to lay down and try and take a nap while the others are running. So Tom's just laying there in the dark, eyes closed, when he hears a loud, "What the fuck?" from down the hall near Alex's room. And you know that Squidward meme where his eyes shoot open, but he just continues laying there? Well, that's exactly what Tom did for a little bit, as Alec ran around, livid, entering whatever room he could, so he could rummage through people's things to try and find his. So eventually, Alec gets fucking campus security involved. And at this point, Tom actually gets up to investigate, and Alec is standing there, hilariously clothed in nothing but a towel. I mean, this does make sense because his bag with all his clothes was taken. So they're running around, unlocking every door with the master key card, even the rooms that absolutely nobody should have ever been in, as they're completely empty. So they're finally able to get to the 6th grader's room, and they obviously find all the stuff piled in there. So security finds the 6th graders, and in the most over-the-top and cartoonish fashion ever, Alec points at them and shouts, "It's them! They're the thieves!" Thinking quickly, I guess, the 6th grader said, "But it couldn't have been us. We can't even lift half that stuff." So luckily campus security believes them, and honestly, they're just really confused. So Taylor and the rest of the runners get back, and Alec is just sitting there, complacent as ever, like nothing had even happened. Tom gives them a look and gestures for everyone to follow him into one of the rooms. Here, he tells them the whole story. So security comes to the conclusion that there might be a real thief on campus and that they should print new keycards. But they'll have to charge everyone staying at the camp for it, which is pretty fucking expensive to print all those cards. So eventually Tom and Taylor end up going to the head of the camp and tell him exactly what happened. And the guy's just like, "Well, okay then." And they decide not to reprint the cards. But nobody in the group lets Alec live this down. Anytime something slightly bad happens, someone on the team is just like, "Hey, maybe we should get campus security involved." Alex? Alec just gets really angry and just storms off down the hall back to his room. The hilarious thing is he can't slam the door because he can't even close it. He didn't even want to bring his keycard anywhere, so he just propped the door open with his dresser. So it was hilarious and anticlimactic to see him get angry, stomp off, and just walk into his room and curl up on the top of his bunk bed. So this last thing involving Alec happened on the last day of the camp. So they were doing this thing called the flashlight rally. Basically, it was a 4x4 in the middle of this kind of wooded area at night. So after the race, Taylor and Tom decided to head back and help pack things up and lift things and whatnot. It was supposed to be just Taylor and Tom, but guess who decides to tag along behind them? Yep, it's Alec. So of course they get lost on the way back, because it wouldn't be a story without them getting lost, right? So Tom and Taylor are logically trying to find their way back, based on remembering little snippets of the path they took. Meanwhile, Alec is just being a complete spastic in the background, shouting out nonsensical directions to go, like, just out of nowhere being like, "Hey, maybe we should go this way," to a path where there's absolutely no possibility of it leading back to the camp. And of course, Tom and Taylor just dismiss anything he says. Eventually, Alec somehow becomes even more of a spastic and starts shouting for security. You know, even though they leave at like 8 o'clock. Just imagine the tenseness of this situation, being completely lost in a relatively unfamiliar area, and this spastic guy just shouting, "Security! Somebody help us!" like every 20 seconds. Eventually, Tom turns around and in uncharacteristically angry voice shouts,
"Hey! Shut the fuck up!"
And this does get Alec to shut up for about 10 minutes anyways. Afterwards, he just continues to shout out for them to go in random directions, but they eventually find their way back. And yeah, so it's not entirely out of the realm of possibilities that this Alec guy had some mental problem, but it's more that he was just a jerk and a spastic weirdo. A few years ago, my partner and I moved from the East Coast to the Pacific Northwest. We didn't know anyone in this city, we just saved up a decent chunk of money and hopped onto a plane. It was exciting and we certainly haven't regretted it. The plan was to stay at hostels and cheap hotels until we could find work in an apartment. Finding work was actually quite easy for us. We had new jobs within a week of getting off the plane. Finding somewhere to live, though, was a nightmare. Everywhere we looked had incredibly steep requirements for credit scores and minimum household income. We tried more legitimate sites at first, but after 2 months of hopping around at different hostels, motels, and Airbnb places, we became so desperate we went to Craigslist. Many of the listings we tried just gave us just as much trouble at first, though. So one day I'm desperately scouring Craigslist for rooms, and I come across one that seemed a little weird. The poster said that he had a very large house in a nice neighborhood, and he wanted to rent out 500 square feet for $600 a month, utilities included. In this city, that was suspiciously cheap. He also wrote out in a rambling sort of way. It was almost half an ad for a room and half an open letter for anyone who had recently accused him of being creepy. Now, obviously, if we weren't so desperate, we would not have even considered contacting this man. But we thought that we might have been at risk of running out of money before we could get somewhere at this rate, so we gave him a call. On the phone, he sounded relatively normal. He actually suggested that we meet up with him in a public place to talk about the room first. We agreed to meet him at a restaurant near the hostel we were staying at, although we didn't tell him which hostel we were staying at, of course. He showed up late and looked surprised to actually see us there. He sat down and he talked for a long time. I say that he talked rather than we talked because he rambled non-stop about himself and how he felt persecuted by everyone in this city. He claimed to be an artist and a collector. In between him repeating himself many times about how the locals just don't understand his passions, he also told us that the room he had advertised was currently filled with his collection. He never once said what he had collected, though, and that if things went well, he would hire people to move it into storage before we could move in. At one point, he stopped talking abruptly and ran to the restroom. We took this opportunity to discuss the situation. We knew at this point he was probably a crazy person, but the threat of homelessness was looming, so we agreed that we should at least see the place and decide based on that rather than his eccentricities. He came back to the table sweaty and flustered. We weren't sure why at the time, but we figured it out later. Before we could say anything, he blurted out,
"I want to show you the apartment right now."
We were surprised by this, but we had just discussed seeing it, so we agreed. I asked him to text me the address and that we would take public transportation to meet him there. He insisted that he drive us there since we didn't have a car. Now, we were obviously hesitant to get in his truck. It was even obvious to him, I think. But the previously mentioned desperation was still a thing, and we were pretty sure he wasn't going to try and hurt us. We were right, but it was still a bad decision to make in retrospect. So we crammed into the front seat of his tiny, rusty, ancient-looking pickup truck. My partner was pressed up against the door, and I was uncomfortably close to the driver as he continued his babble about how this city had gone downhill and how everybody he used to hang out with shuns him these days. At one point, I whispered to my partner to get ready for a possible tuck-and-roll situation. The driver saw me whispering, but he couldn't really hear me over the roaring wind through the cab of the truck. One of the windows was broken out, really added to the vehicle's charms. He said something about how we were romantic together and that he envied our youth. We arrived at this house minutes after that. He had been technically honest up to this point. His neighborhood was decent looking, and his home was a pretty large one-story ranch house. I noted out loud that he had bars on all of his windows and several locks on his front door. He said that his collection was very valuable to him, and he was just protecting it from thieves. Once he let us in, I made a point of urging him ahead so that he couldn't get a chance to lock the door behind us. We very quickly noticed three things: his art, his collection, and the smell. This man's method of art, of which he was very proud, was apparently to take lots of innocent childlike things like baby dolls, stuffed animals, ceramic figurines, other child's toys, and etc., and attach dildos to them. One of the most notable places being the one he referred to as his unicorn. It was a ceramic horse figurine that he had sloppily sawed the head off of and replaced it with a baby doll's head and added a hand-sculpted clay penis as the horn. His collection consisted mainly of rubber, plastic, and latex clothing and gas masks. Both his collection and his art were everywhere. The place was so jam-packed with junk in every room. There was only a single-file path going through it that you could walk without bumping into his art or stepping on the piles of fetish wear. This fellow was definitely not concerned about cleanliness either. The place reeked of mildew and moldy rubber. The carpet looked as if it hadn't seen a vacuum since the 70s. As we passed through the kitchen, he declared that he loves cast iron pans because you don't have to wash them, just as we noticed that every countertop was cluttered with rusty pans that all looked like it had decades worth of scorched food caked in. We stayed behind him, mostly silent, as he stopped every now and then to point out his favorite art pieces and to repeatedly tell us that he was leading us to the room and that it was full of his favorite stuff right now, but that he'd be able to get people to move it out for us. He said that, like us moving in was a sure thing. He opened the door to the room and actually said, "Voila!" I don't doubt that the room was around 500 square feet, but every inch of it was stuffed with clothing racks. The clothing racks were all packed with the same thing: shiny rubber, latex, and plastic pairs of pants with dildos sewn into the front of them. Up to this point, we were doing our best to avoid reacting to all the freaky stuff in this guy's home because we were afraid he would snap on us if we did. But I started to notice after a while that he was getting disappointed that we weren't reacting to anything. My guess is that he gets off on shocking people with his creepy pants and that this wasn't going as well as he had hoped. We told him that the room looked big enough and that we'd like to go back to our hotel and think it over. He didn't have much of a reaction to that, but he agreed to drive us back home now. When he thought that I wasn't looking, he took something out of his pocket and tossed it through the open doorway of a dark room on his way past it. I was afraid that it might have been his car keys, so I used the light on my phone to take a peek as I passed that room. The whole room was a pile of tied-off used condoms, or sperm balloons, as my partner called them later. We later speculated that he was masturbating at the restaurant and added a balloon to the pile before taking us back. So we piled back into his truck and had a long, awkward drive back to the place where we had met. His rambling was much more frustrated this time around, and he passed where we wanted to get out 3 times before we jumped out at a red light, frantically shouting, "This is good, well, it was nice to meet you, but thanks, bye." I added his number to my contacts as Mr. Creepy Pants. Over the next several days, he sent us a few texts asking if we had talked it over yet. I wanted to be polite, so I just said, "We've decided against it, but thank you very much for the nice offer." He responded with the phrase, "Are you creeped yet?" copied and pasted over and over like 30 times. I'm not sure why I was still trying to be polite, but when he stopped spamming me, I responded, "No, we thought your collection was lovely, but it's just so large that we can't bring ourselves to ask you to move it out." It took him a few days to respond, but he did, and he took it better than I expected. "Yeah, I didn't really want to move it out. Thanks for understanding." He then made us a recommendation for some local burger place for some reason. I blocked his number after that, just to be safe. For the record, we didn't care that he was a fetishist of some sort. We cared that he was really freaking gross about it. So, Mr. Creepy Pants, let's not meet again. We were 16, an age where you feel invincible. And note from the reader here, I'm 16 and I don't feel invincible in the slightest. I don't know why teenagers always say that. Maybe it's just my personality. But anyways, it was summer and school was out, and my friend and I, who lived in the same apartment complex as me, decided to go to the mall and kill time as any other underage teenager would do. I don't remember much about that day other than our walk home from the mall. It must have been around 9 when we left, since that is the time the mall closes. Our apartment building was 2 miles away from the mall, so of course we walked. It was hot out, and we both knew once we got home there would be nothing to do, so we opted to walk home. We enjoyed the conversation and the passing of time. Our town wasn't exactly dangerous. Yeah, there were muggings and theft, but it wasn't as bad as other cities in our county where rape and unsolved murders were commonplace. So we walked those 2 miles, oblivious to any potential threats. We were a mile in when we passed an intersection. Shortly thereafter, 3 males walked out of the opposite street and began walking behind us. I didn't think much of it. It's summer, they were young, it's hot, no reason to be suspicious. My friend, however, was kind of unnerved. Hey, yeah? Those guys behind us, what about them? I'm pretty sure they're following us. What? No, I think you're just being paranoid. As soon as I said that, one of the men started whistling at us. I turned around. What do you got in that bag? We had shopping bags from the mall. Nothing, leave us the fuck alone, my friend retorted. I remember being pissed. Why would she respond to them? At this point, I'm nervous as fuck. Turns out my friend was right. Call it intuition. We began walking faster now as we sensed danger, and as we quickened our pace, so do the men. They know we're on to them. We near a plaza with a Del Taco, and as soon as we enter the parking lot, the men disperse. One is directly behind us, and the other 2 are at our sides. I turn around. They all whip out fucking metal baseball bats out of nowhere. At this point, I turn to my friend, and we're hightailing it to the Del Taco, not bothering to turn around. Thank God it wasn't too late, or they'd be close and we'd have nowhere to hide. As soon as we enter the Del Taco, we look out the windows and witness all men jumping into a Cadillac Escalade that was parked. Were they only scaring us? Why the bats? Why the car? And what the fuck was even going on? We watched as the car drives away. This doesn't quell our fear at all, though. We spend about 10 minutes in the restaurant deciding what to do next. Do I call my dad to pick us up? Or do we walk the half-mile home? We didn't want to worry our parents, and so, for some incomprehensible reason, we decided to walk. The whole time we were constantly turning back, anticipating a black Escalade to pop out of nowhere and kidnap us. As soon as we get home, we promised ourselves to not tell our parents, as it would hinder us from hanging out again. The moment I walked through the door, I blabbed to my parents. I later found out that my friend did the same. It was the scariest experience of my life. Hey, longtime fan of the Let's Not Meet subreddit. I've been meaning to post this for a while. It's definitely a childhood memory of mine that I will never forget, even today, as I'm 22. Growing up, my aunt and uncle owned a beach condo. My favorite way to spend the summer was to stay there with my family, specifically my cousin Charlie. We were absolutely inseparable growing up, as there was only a 1-year difference between us. The beach we stayed at was a very popular tourist beach at the South Carolina coast. So in the summer, it was incredibly busy. I mean, there was barely any room between you and the family next to you. Now, my family would spend all day at the beach, from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. The beach would stay crowded until about 5 p.m., and everyone would go back to their rooms to shower and go out to eat. So from around 5 to 7 every day was my favorite time to be outside. We would actually have room to run wild, build sandcastles, dig huge holes, and not have to worry about people knocking them down or being too close. Around 5:30 p.m. one day, my family decided they wanted to go walk to the pier, about 2 miles away, and me and Charlie begged to stay so we could build sandcastles. We were 9 and 10 at the time, and they said we could stay as long as we didn't get in the water or leave our beach spot. The condo we stayed at was one row back, and we were not allowed to cross the street without adults. We agreed to our terms and continued to build a row of sandcastles as they walked away. About 5 minutes later, an extremely tall man wearing a floppy beach hat, sunglasses, with a dollop of sunscreen on his nose, had come straight up to us. He started commenting on how pretty our sandcastles were, asking how long it took us to build them that high, if it was just the two of us working on them, which I clearly could see what he was getting at with these weird questions now. We were both extremely introverted kids. We thanked him, but we kept our answers short and tried to ignore him as he stood there asking more questions. All of a sudden, he got really quiet, started looking around at the mostly empty beach, and said he had to go meet his friend. He told us to stay right here so he could bring his friend back to look at how great our sandcastles were, and then he walked away from us. When he got away at a safe distance, me and Charlie both looked at each other and said, "We gotta get out of here." Side note, hell yeah for us being smart kids. We immediately started weighing our options. We knew our family wouldn't be back for at least another 30 minutes. We also knew we weren't allowed to cross the street, and quite frankly, we were scared to. About 100 yards away is a tiny ramp overlooking the ocean. I believe it was a handicap access to the beach as well as just a place to sit. We got our big shovels and decided to hollow out the space under the ramp pier thing so that there was enough space that we could crawl under there and not be seen. It didn't take us long since the high tide over the years had taken a good 3 feet of sand underneath it, and our adrenaline was rushing mad fast. We took our shovels inside and crawled under. The man was still yet to be seen. I assume it took us all of 8 minutes to climb under the pier. Our heads were partially visible above the sand horizon, and we started freaking out, thinking he'd be able to spot us if he looked hard enough. There were 2 boogie boards lying about 50 yards away that looked like kids had abandoned them on the beach. We grabbed them and propped them up against the ramp, covering our crawl space and the top of our heads from sight. Charlie curled up in a ball and cried while running scenarios that me and him were definitely going to be taken. I tried to calm him down and said everything was going to be okay and that both of our parents would be back soon, but I definitely felt like crying myself. This whole thing felt so weird. I felt like since we both had such a bad feeling about the situation, especially at such a young age, this man definitely had sinister intentions. Charles and I peeked out of the small slits where the boogie boards curved and eventually saw the man walking back. He didn't have anyone with him, which we definitely thought he would since he said he was bringing back a friend. He saw we were gone, turned around several times, checking to see if we were in the ocean or up by the dunes. Once he realized, and thankfully he didn't notice us there, that we were gone, he got extremely angry. Noticeably angry. He actually started huffing and puffing and stomping around. He then looked at our sandcastles and kicked all of them down. We built a ton of them over the course of the day, and basically we had a long wall of them. And he kicked every single mound down and stormed away. We stayed under the ramp pier thing for 45 more minutes until our family finally got back. We were way too scared to get out, especially after seeing his irrational reaction. We cried and told our family what happened, and they didn't believe us. We still talk about it sometimes at family gatherings or holidays. Both of us still remember it like it was yesterday. Seriously, I'm glad we were aware kids who thought quickly. So, creepy-ass beach man who kicked down our sandcastles, let's not meet. And a note from the reader here, wow, your parents are really irresponsible. Not only did they leave you alone there when you were 10 years old, but they didn't even believe you when you actually did get into some jeopardy. So, wow, a parent should really trust their kids implicitly, in my opinion, like, especially if you were crying, but I don't know, I'm not a parent yet, but still, I feel like it's more just a defense mechanism from them because they couldn't bear the fact that they had left you alone and let that happen to you, I guess. But it's always irritated me when these kinds of stories end like that, especially when it's the parent's fault in the first place.